And then we can turn it over to you, Eric.
Okay, do you want to do any introductions, or we all know each other by now?
There's some new people, but
All right, all right.
it's up to
So
you.
so so what I was thinking about doing is just go do a super flyby on what we did in the first series and the second series. So let me that's this is me, Eric Shell, and chairman of Strawwater Associates, and for the last 29 years, traveled around rural America seeing you guys. So and as Debbie just said, this last week I was in Juneau for 3 days, so got to enjoy a snowstorm. The first series, back on February 6th, we just talked about basic accounting, finance 101 kind of stuff. Last week, last Friday, we spent some time talking about the different payment models, primarily Medicare payment models, fee-for-service payment versus value-based care. Um, this session is my favorite session. It's when I'm looking at a hospital that's underperforming, what are the three keys to success that I look for, and what are the things that I coach around helping people do better? And so that's what we're going to talk about today. But just to go back and talk a little about these foundational elements of Finance 101. This big one here, the accrual basis accounting versus cash basis accounting. We've talked about this the last 2 weeks. Cash basis accounting is you recognize revenue in your financial statements when you cut the check. You recognize the expense when you cut the check. Or, right, or excuse me, you recognize revenue when you receive the check. You recognize expense when you cut the check. Accrual-based accounting is you recognize revenue in our financial statements when you sold the asset, when you delivered a service, you recognize it then, irrespective of when you received the cash. You recognize the expense when the expense was incurred versus when the check was paid. And we talked about the example of we're all here getting paid, hopefully, for working. We didn't get a check today, but our financial statements will recognize an expense for all of us today. Um, and a long way to say is that there's accrual-based accounting is generally the way, well, it's actually the way all hospitals report their financial statements. Cash basis accounting is often the way you recognize on your income taxes. We then talked a little bit about the difference between gross revenue charges versus net revenue, and where net revenue is what you expect to receive in cash. Gross revenue is what our charge master says a service is billed out at. The difference being something we call contractual allowances. It's what we write down our gross revenue, our charge to reflect what we expect to get payment. We then talked about our two primary income or financial statements, the income statement and the balance sheet. The income statement is an accumulation over time, whether it be a week, a month, a quarter, a year. It's the accumulation of all days revenue and expense in a week, quarter, week, month, quarter, year. And it generally is reflected as revenue. Revenue is recorded for essentially amounts earned for providing services or selling, and then expenses. In this statement, you can see this income statement. You have your revenues. This is year to date right here. So 41 million in total revenue. This is charges. Here are the contractual allowances. So we expect to get patient revenue of about 20 million. Then we have other operating revenue, non-patient. This is, you sell food in the cafeteria, you 340B proceeds. There are other revenue here. Then you have your expenses. So here's your total revenue, then your expenses. You add up all your expenses. The net operating income for this hospital for this period, the year ending 11/30, is about 3 million bucks. And then you have some other non-operating revenue and expense for a bottom line of about 5.2 million. This hospital does well. So again, for whatever period, if it's the year, if it's the quarter ended, it's accumulation of all the days revenue and expense reflected in a bottom line here. We then talked about the balance sheet. The balance sheet is either what you have available to spend, resources available is assets, liabilities are amounts you owe to others, and then the fund balance or accumulated earnings over time, and it's at one date and time. So for this hospital, it's as of September 30th, at this day, specific date, they've got $19 million of cash and cash equivalents on hand. They have accounts receivable. They have total current assets of, oh, excuse me, current year as 31 million, prior year 28 million. They have some cash set aside by the board. They have fixed assets. This is your equipment. This is your building, net of depreciation. So this hospital has total assets, resources available, about 70 million. It's gone up a little bit since the prior year. And then we have liabilities, what we owe to people. In current, we've got about $3 million we owe. Long term, we've got some long-term debt, about 10 million. So total liabilities of 13 million. The difference between essentially what we have available to us and what we owe is accumulation of earnings over time or net position. As of, in this case, September 30th, 2022, our two primary income or financial statements, the balance sheet and the income statement. Then we talked about the budget. All of us, many of us nurse leaders and quality leaders are responsible for our own budget. The budget is reflected as an income statement specific to your department, your organization, whatever level of leadership that you're involved in. So think of it as the income statement, the accumulation over time of revenue, less expenses. And in this case, you can see, again, current year to date, current year estimated, and then this is your proposed budget for 2023. So this was 2022 actual, current year estimated 3/31/2022, and then this is the budget. So again, think of it in the form of an income statement. We talked about key budget characteristics. And then we had this case study. We looked at this one hospital's income statement and we made some assessments as how they were doing. If we look at fiscal year to date, net operating income, they lost a little money. Prior year, they lost a lot of money. But anyway, so that was it. We had to answer some questions. So that was session one. Session two, we got into talking primarily about the reimbursement models that are available. And how most payment, at least much of payment for acute care hospitals on the inpatient is tied to DRGs. It's a diagnostic related group is a set of services bundled under one, they call it DRG, that has a case weight. That case weight is multiplied by a base rate. There's add-on payments, and then there's adjustments, penalties, those types of things. But that's inpatient. Outpatient is similar, but in outpatient to acute care hospitals paid on a ambulatory payment classification, APCs. That's not critical access hospitals. There's different types of rural hospitals out there. There's a Soul Community Hospital, different criteria for them. It's all here on slide 20. There's a Medicare dependent hospital. Again, different criteria, a little slightly different payment system on the inpatient side for Medicare. And then we have our critical access hospitals. And critical access hospitals, again, we have to meet certain criteria. Many of us are critical access hospitals in Alaska. Medicare pays essentially your cost. You take your financial statements, your expenses, you load them into the cost report. The cost report calculates what percent is Medicare, and at the end of the year, Medicare pays you their percent of cost. For Medicaid in Alaska, Medicaid pays on a similar cost basis, but my understanding is they determine costs every 3 or 4 years, and then costs are trended forward for the next 3 or 4 years, and then they reset their costs after this 3 or 4 year period. So it's similar to Medicare. The costs are the basis and then trended forward. We talked about physician payment. Um, um, that essentially every every service a physician provides has a CPT code, a CPT code definition, and a relative value unit weighting. Relative value units are essentially it's accumulation of three types of relative value units. There's a work component, a physician practice. The PE is physician practice expense, and then there's a malpractice RVU. Um, and so, for example, 99213, established patient intermediate office visit, may have a work RVU of I probably say 1.4. A practice expense may be 1.2. Malpractice may be zero point 0.2. You add these three up, and it comes up around a total weighting for a 99213 of 2.7, 2.75. We multiply that by this GPCI, this geographic pricing. In Alaska, that's very high. Very high. Your GPCI may be 1.5. So you get additional weights because of your high cost of living. Then you multiply that all by a standard conversion factor that's set by the federal government every year. That's around $34 right now. So we each CPT code then has a total relative value unit weighting. The relative value total weighting is made up of these three components, the work component, the practice expense, and the malpractice. You add those three together, multiply it by a conversion factor, and that's how you determine payment. Rural health clinics are different. Rural health clinics have a cost-based payment rate, especially the grandfathered ones that um, that do, and it's there's for the new new rural health clinics past uh, 20 or calendar year 2020. There's a statutory rate that is the upper payment limit, and these are the rates right here. So right now in 2026, the most we could get in our rural health clinic is $165 all-inclusive visit. And we talked a little about value-based care, and I know we didn't get all the way into this discussion, but here's what I know about Alaska. There's not a lot of value-based care going on in Alaska. So if anyone's really in this topic, interested in this topic, we can come back in another day and kind of get to it. And you talk a little bit about accountable care organizations. But at this point, it's just not a real big area of interest in the state of Alaska. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Yeah. What we're going to do is we're just going to bypass that and get to my favorite part of this presentation, which, kind of taking everything you guys know now and you could go get your CPAs. Um, what does this former CPA, how do I look at the operations of a rural hospital and what do I look for um, when I see a hospital that's kind of going sideways from a financial performance perspective? And there's three things that I've traveled, again, I've probably been to 400 rural hospitals in 29 years. And the hospitals that do these three things well tend to outperform all others. And I've got some case studies to back that up a little bit. This overall discussion is really couched in this frame of reference that it's community hospitals are successful in their commitment centers on abundance, growth, and incremental contribution margin. I'll explain that in a minute, as opposed to focus on expense management, cost reductions, and cost reductions to the existing care model. So a lot of words there. Essentially, what we try to do is figure out ways to provide more units of service, recognizing that a significant portion of our costs are fixed or step fixed, which creates contribution margin. All right, that sounded like MBA talk. I get it. I'm going to explain it much more in detail in a minute. So, but if you look at this graphic, if you add up, think about this, all of this bar is revenue, and it's $100, right? If you add up this section and this section, it's $100. What this is saying is that and I'll ask you to think about this. Um, if you admit a patient to your hospital this afternoon, how much did our costs go up? Or truly, if you close your eyes for a second, don't keep them closed too long here. This is accounting. If you close your eyes for a second and think about what your cost just went up, it's a very small portion of what your total cost structure is. And so what happens is you create incremental, what we say, so you have revenue, $100. Well, let's be real, let's $10,000. Let's just say our variable expenses for this admission, food, drugs, maybe $1,000. So what we just did is we created $9,000 of contribution margin. That's what we call this. It's the difference between our revenue of 10,000 less our expenses of 1,000 is contribution margin. Contribution margin, if you move over here, goes to cover all of our fixed costs and our step fixed costs. Plus it creates profit or loss depending on, kind of what our volume and our cost structure is. So what we tend to do is create an effort on creating incremental services that result in this contribution margin that covers all your fixed costs and creates a small amount of profit or reduces losses. So high level, that's how we want to think. The three characteristics of the most successful rural hospitals that I see, the first is this abundance, infinite game mindset. Leadership has an abundance mindset, and I'll explain that in a minute. The second is there's a fundamental understanding in the organization of the concept that I just talked about, that how we create contribution margin and incremental volume results in this notion of contribution margin. And the third is a measurement culture. In absence of measurement, what I've found is politics rule decision making and accountability is not there. And what we like to see is wherever we can drive performance with accountability through measurement, we're going to seek that out. And I've got lots of examples of how to think about that. And then I've got 5 or 6 case studies just to show the power of these three pieces. So first, I like to look, these are kind of how I think of my values and how I think. The last one of these, so impact, always think about how we can leave something better than it was before. Interdependence. It's we are all smart, we're all part of a very small system, and what we do impacts others. Respect for oneself, for others. But this third one is this idea of abundance. Stephen Covey, who in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, coined this idea of abundance versus scarcity. And the way he talked about, think about, I'm going to start explaining scarcity. Scarcity, think of it as a pie of success. And if Debbie is successful, she's on my team. And if Debbie is successful, she just took some of my pie. And so I'm going to, even though the overall organization, because she's successful, benefited, I don't want Debbie to benefit because she's taking some of my pie. That's my pie. And so when that happens, what you have is you get hoarding of information, you get hoarding of credit, you get you just create this dysfunctional organization. And what I found as I travel around is probably 85% of rural hospitals have significant what do I want to say, portions of the leadership that is highly scarcity based. Abundance, on the other hand, said, Debbie, if you're successful, that pie of success just grew and everybody wins. And when we see organizations that live in that abundance mindset, you can almost immediately see a change in the culture, a change in the mindset, and a change in the profitability, for no other better word. So this is just a little bit more. Stephen Covey defined this idea of abundance mentality or abundance mindset. A person believes there are enough resources and successes to share with others. And again, it's contrasted with this scarcity mindset. I see the opposite side of the same coin is this book that Simon Sinek. Anyone's familiar with Simon Sinek? I find him one of my favorite authors. He wrote a book called The Infinite Game, and what in this book, what he said is that when in business, our organizations essentially live in a world um, without rules of engagement. The game doesn't have a set ending or a goal or a score or winners and losers. And because of that, the goal of any organization should be to stay in the game to perpetuate its mission versus trying to win or not lose. And he talks about the fact that we in order to do that, we have to make long run decisions, long term decisions that aren't necessarily best for the short term or one or an individual with an organization, but that have long term positive consequences. And so I look at this infinite game mindset as the same coin, different side. It's more of a corporate mindset around abundance versus the abundance that Stephen Covey talks about is the individual. I'll show you. I have 6 examples in a minute of case studies where abundance-based leaders came in, and I'll show you the results on their organization. Thoughts on that? I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on abundance. Anybody have a perspective on that? Hmm.
I'll share a little anecdote, I guess, or a little perspective. What about when one part of the business is reporting this tremendous abundance, success,
Hmm.
but it's creating inefficiencies and losses in other parts of the value stream? That's what I'm up against right now.
Huh. Well, just because one department, let's just say it's a department, is successful, if it's doing it to the detriment of others, then that department's being selfishly, I wouldn't call that abundance at all. I would call that's hoarding success to the detriment of the rest of the organization. So I would consider that a scarcity play rather than an abundance play.
Thank you.
You know what I mean? Yeah, I mean, it's somebody hoarding their pie. Elise, are you saying something or you just because you're on mute?
No, somebody just showed me something.
Oh, oh.
Yes, yes, what you're saying makes sense. That the abundance mindset only really works when everyone participates in it,
Yeah.
as
And
opposed to when someone is focused on their own benefit.
yeah, it's and what I've found is in most organizations, though those that make it up through the ranks, there's 2 ways of doing it. One is by bringing everybody in and sharing, and everyone together gets the success. Or it's one person that is competing with all others, and competition takes from others to be that person becomes successful. Um, most most abundant-minded people get taken out on their way up their organization. That's in my experience. I have 3 of my most abundant leaders that I know in this country that are just unbelievable. These 3 gentlemen all got taken out by scarcity-based leadership. So it's tough. It's a tough one. But anyway, I consider it one of the most important attributes of successful hospitals. The next is we had talked a little about economic philosophy. It gets back to that contribution margin, right? And it's this idea that there's costs. You can there's variable costs, and then there's fixed and step fixed costs. If you think about a variable cost, and again, you almost have to close your eyes because our accounting system's not going to tell us what these costs are. It's if volume changes today, we have one more lab test come in or one more emergency room visit. Let's say we do, we go down to our physician clinic, we pick up a lab draw, we bring it back and we do that lab test. How much did our lab costs go up? How much cost went up because of that one additional lab test? Thoughts on this? Come on, you guys were much more participative last time. This is the fun one.
Not very, the actual cost probably didn't go up very much.
The reagents, right? I mean, it's right. It's reagents, and if you can generate $40 on a lab test, and the reagents are $2, you just created a $38 contribution margin. You do that 100 times a day, and it starts adding up. Fixed costs or step fixed costs. Think of those as costs that we in our nursing floor. At some point, if our census is at 6 and it goes to 10, we're going to have to call in a second shift. We're going to have to call in the troops, right, to help out with staffing. So there's a certain amount of step fixed costs here, but for the most part, what I've found is that, and this has always kind of been theory until just this summer when the University of Iowa published a study on this, is that the smaller the rural hospital, the higher the step fixed costs as a percent of total costs is. And that plays out because that gives us a greater ability to create contribution margin, right? The difference between revenue, that $40 lab test, and the reagent, that $2. So this was a great study that came out by the University of Iowa School of Public Health. And lots of words here, but what they did is they looked at analysis of they looked at cost report data from 2011 to 2020. So 10 years of cost report data for like 5,000 hospitals. And what they were trying to tease out, it estimated fixed and variable costs using the simple definition of a variable cost. The simple definition is, if volume changes, what changed in my cost? So they ran this huge regression analysis to try to figure out and get to the bottom of what are these true variable costs. And so here, let me just summarize. If you look here where my pointer is, this is large hospital, and this is the count of the number of hospitals. This is kind of medium-sized hospital. This is small, and this is very small. And what they showed was that for the large hospitals, this was the percent on average of fixed costs to total cost. The inverse of that, the 27%, is your variable cost. The smallest of hospitals, the fixed costs are 93%, meaning the variable costs are only 7 cents on the dollar. Why do you think that's really important finding as we just talked about these economics? Why is this so important? Fundamental understanding for our smallest of rural hospitals. Ideas? Elise, you're the only one participating today. I'm sorry. You're gonna get a star, a gold star.
That's what happens when people are on camera. That's why we like putting
I
people
know.
on camera. Well,
Everyone else is sleeping.
Patricia also contributed, but it's a quiet
Oh,
group, but it's a small group today.
It looks to me like it means that the fixed costs mostly are going to stay the same, and the variable costs,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
the fixed costs are not being, the staffing and such, probably has the ability to do a lot more lab tests with small
Right,
increase
right,
in fixed
absolutely.
tests, and then the actual revenue that comes in can be a lot more if you've actually got a lot more patients.
Right. So what this does is it shouts out, if we could figure out a way to have one more admission, one more lab test, one more emergency room visit, and in that admission we get $10,000, and our variable costs might be food and drugs, say 1,000. That creates a $9,000 contribution margin that covers all of the fixed costs, plus either reduces losses or creates a small profit. And so there has not been one rural hospital I've ever been to that didn't have an opportunity to keep more patients in their community for services. And to the extent we can keep more patients in our communities, the bottom line impact of that is significant. So that's when I always say that when we go to help a hospital, there's three ways you can improve performance, financial performance. The first way is to figure out how to keep more patients in your health system, right? Keep people local, get care here, because that is the tide that lifts all boats at a 90% contribution margin. The second way is to figure out how to get paid better for what you're doing, right? Whether it be improved revenue cycle functions or better third-party contracts or 340B revenue, because what that does is that increases the contribution margin on all services because you get paid a higher amount. And the third way, if you want to do better financially, and I'm going to put an asterisk on that one, is you cut expenses. And my asterisk is that I think cutting expenses, you may win the battle and lose the war. So in my 400 hospitals that I've been worked with, cutting expenses has been a recommendation around 3 times, probably 3 times in my entire career. Because if you want to improve efficiency, let's figure out how to grow and keep more patients in our hospital, creating a 90% contribution margin. So any further discussion on that? Because I think the more people that understand those basic concepts, man, we are in good shape. So what does that look like? I look at efficiency. We talk about we all want to be more efficient. I think we can. I tend to think of efficiency as not just pure expense, but expense divided by volume, and having the appropriate volumes to meet community, to meet community need. There's always an opportunity for improved efficiencies. Revenue cycles have to be operating at best practices. I was just on a call this morning with a hospital in Kansas where their revenue cycle just blew up, and they just had to take a huge write down. They're running out of cash. It's horrible, but revenue cycle can be kind of a rough place. We do still have to manage expenses. We just can't let stop paying attention to them, but we do have to manage them. And so part of the budget process is a focus on managing expenses. Physician practices managed effectively, effective organizational design, patient engagement, proactive patient engagement. I think this is one of the greatest opportunities for rural hospitals. Often our rural health systems, we have a catcher's mitt on. We sit and wait for a patient that gets sick to call into our office rather than proactively reaching out and through annual wellness visits, well child visits, active patient panel management. All of these are opportunities to think of our people as our community as people versus patients. I think when we think of our community as patients, it's a function of sick care. If we start thinking of our community as people, it's a function of healthcare, and we all can take strides to be better there. So some of the opportunities I often see, I know it's a goofy analogy using baseball, but often when I go into a rural hospital, I would say 80% of department managers fundamentally catchers. They sit behind in their office, and if the volume doesn't come in, they'll point at the doctor and say they threw a wild pitch. In other words, they didn't refer patients to us. and versus a pitcher who is, the physical therapy manager. It's often physical therapy is your pitchers. They're out there at the ball games, the kids' ball games. They're leading the 5K races in your community. And their volumes are going through the roof. And so I always ask, if we could take that one person's mindset, or, this pitching mindset, and roll it out to 4 other departments in our hospital, what would be the impact on incremental volume? I promise you it would be significant. So some of the areas that I see, proactive opportunities around ER admissions. I like to see ER admissions between 10 and 12% of ER visits. And that's one that I often, some hospitals you see, some that don't pay attention to this, it's 4 or 5%. Swing bed I've found is one of the most manageable service lines. The more we pay attention to it and put strategic emphasis on swing bed volume, it goes up. As soon as we take that strategic emphasis spotlight off of it, swing bed volume goes down. And that's a great opportunity. Ancillary services, these are all opportunities for us to stop saying it's the doctor's fault and go create our own service lines and business lines. Measurement system, we're going to get to that in revenue cycle, best practices, supercharging front-end processes, kind of education, upfront collections, making sure our charge master, third-party contracts are up to date. And increasingly, it's not here, but denial management. We have to have a system around denial management. You guys in Alaska, Medicare Advantage plans haven't had the same penetration they have in the lower 48, but the Medicare Advantage plans are killing rural hospitals all over the lower 48. Then the last area is measurement. And again, I think wherever we can create a measurement system has the opportunity to take politics out of decision and drive accountability in. So this was a framework that I learned back in MBA school at the University of Rochester years ago. And what we talked about is organizational design. And think of organizational design as a three-legged stool. And the three legs of the stool, if you change one, you got to change the other two. And so the theory says that effective organizational design starts with where do we in the organization have to set decision rights? Are we able to centralize decision rights, or do we have to push decision rights down into the bowels of our organization? And generally the criteria for that is when there's site-specific information, a patient is right in front of us and we have to make a decision. That is information we can't run to the CEO every time a patient sits in front of us. So in the front lines in healthcare, we have to have decision rights. And so what organizational theory says is if you push down decision rights into the organization, then we've got to do a couple different things. One, in terms of compensation, we have to create a compensation system that rewards individuals for efforts that align with organizational goals. Right? If all decisions were centralized, then we could just pay people, it's just a flat compensation, just straight salary. To some degree, because their decisions aren't impacting the performance of the organization. But where decisions are drilled down and pushed down in the front line, then our compensation system should move to more of a merit where organizational, return to the organization creates a return to the individual. And then the third leg of the stool is if we do push these decision makings down, we reward the individual, then we have to get information, two tracks of information. One, performance measurement information to the individual to see the impact of their decisions. But then also a higher level, we have to have information to the senior leadership team to make sure that the trains all stay on track. And so effective organizational design in an organization that pushes decision-making down into the organization, such as healthcare, has to have a measurement system that is effective. And I see hospitals in which there's often an absolute absence of performance improving information shared throughout. So what are some of the areas that you can start with? I always like to start. I know you're going to say, Eric, you're an accountant. Of course you're going to like this one, is the management accounting. And what's best practice management accounting? I like to have all managers involved in the budget process right from the get-go, where there are, and we talked about this in the session one back a month ago, but where department managers are involved in setting expenses and involved in discussing volume and related gross revenue. Um, so once the budgets are set, I want to have a monthly budget to actual report sent to all department managers with variance analysis required. So a manager is going to have to look at their budget, and if it's off of, their actual performance for the month or the quarter, and if it's off of budget by, say, 10%, they have to provide variance analysis. They have to explain what's going on in a plan of correction. And so in this way, that what happens is managers own their budget. They just don't delete that email that comes across their desk. So quality is yeah. Well, actually no. This was a critical access hospital in Hawaii, in which they really lacked a measurement culture. And so they created this manual dashboard that they track every week. They have finance, and the things they looked at in finance were average daily revenue, AR days hospital, AR days clinic, discharge not final bill days, cash collections, and you can see that, like for example, average daily revenue, their target was 140,000. They were underperforming. And look what's happened more recently. It's gone red. Average days. This was all negative. Now it's going positive. Discharge not final billed days. It was negative, and then this is actually turned and actually doing okay. They looked at volumes, right? Incremental volume's important, as we just said. So what are the things they're looking at? Total patient days, acute swing bed, rehab visits, emergency visits, tracking all of this information. And they meet as a senior leadership team weekly to review this dashboard. I think it's a great opportunity to, again, drive more measurement into an organization. Staffing efficiencies. It's funny. I was presenting this to some the critical access hospitals of New York back, I don't know, 9 months ago. And we were talking about kind of departmental staffing. What we tend to do is we've developed a set of rural standards. This is the standard that we tend to pay attention to, where my pointer is. See, if I keep pointing to the screen like this, it's forcing you guys to stop doing emails and pay attention. So what we want to do, so for example, med surg, and this includes acute, swing bed, and observation days. We tend to look at, for nursing per patient day, we look at a standard of 12 paid hours per nursing day. In this hospital's case, the standard would be 46. They're coming in at 42. Obstetrics, we look at 10 paid hours per OB day. Nursery, 5. ICU, almost 21. And we compare. So we look at the standard based on the patient days, creates a standard, and we compare to the actual. So this nursing unit here, I would say this is very efficient. It's right there at benchmarks. And the benchmarks that we've pulled together, these standards, it's think of it as the efficient frontier, the top 20% of rural hospitals. And so emergency, here's surgery. This hospital is actually, the standards would say 21, they're at 29. Very, very good. Emergency room, we usually assume 2.75 paid hours per emergency room visit. These guys standard would be 30. They're coming in at 27.6. So this is overall, this is as efficient of a hospital as I've seen out there. And then you can just see that some of the other radiology, hospital admin. But this is the category, the department. These are the metric that we use, the performance indicator. But so you can kind of look. But the question that we had in New York was they had consultants come in. They had these bigwig consultants come into their rural hospital, into their system. They were part of a larger system. And the consultants said that they had to I believe it was every 8 hours, they had to update their labor efficiency. They had to provide labor efficiency reports on an 8 hour basis. And if they were over or if they were showing excess staff, they had to create a plan of action every 8 hours. And I'm thinking because so much of our costs are fixed, it's completely dependent upon volume. And so I say I tend to like this. If people are going to use this type of information, I say we look at it maybe once a quarter, just to kick the tires and make sure that that we're in the range of reasonableness. I also would say that every rural hospital, you've seen one, you've seen one. There's different staffing models, and so this is not pitching darts. This is more pitching hand grenades. Revenue cycle. I think revenue cycle, the most important key to success in revenue cycle is creating a meaningful dashboard. Here's one I came across years and years ago. Probably 10 years ago, I came across this one. So think about this is KPI, key performance indicator. Here's the indicators that this hospital looked at, right? AR greater than 90 days. They set a target where they have individual person responsible. They had targets then for each. A lot of these are based on medical group or healthcare financial management, HFMA. And then they track their performance over time to give them an idea of where the trend was. This hospital, when they implemented this, in 6 months, they had brought their days and they were kind of 80 days down to about 50 days, just through improved measurement. Here's the quality dashboard that I was saying. I thought this was a pretty comprehensive quality dashboard. I'm sure many of you have something like this in your organization. They have hospital outpatient, ED throughput, readmissions, hospital acquired conditions, MBQIP. But again, they have the metric, a goal, their average for the prior year, kind of where they are currently, and then color coded to show where there's room for where they have to target in on improvement. So I really liked this one to get quality. So just a couple of case studies. This was a good friend of mine was the CEO. This was a critical access hospital in the Northeast. One of my top 3 abundance leaders that I've ever met. I met this gentleman back in 2004. My first meeting at this hospital, it was owned by a system, and the finance committee met to decide if they wanted to keep this hospital open. They were going to close it, and their financial performance. So the green line is revenue, the blue line or the red line is expense, and the blue is your operating margin, your profit, and it's tied to this indicator over here. You can see as this organization progressed, their operating margin just went through the roof. But measurement culture, a CEO very abundant minded, engaged the medical staff. The medical staff, they loved this gentleman, and huge return. This was their quality. So generally, we like to look at hospitals where they compare to others across their region. And this hospital right here was a 5-star from a patient experience perspective. They had the highest score by far of everybody in the state of Massachusetts. And if I showed you this hospital, it was the old TB hospital built in the 1930s at the top of the hill, that you would not think this could get any type of quality scores at all. And here they were leading the state of Massachusetts. But again, abundance leader, everybody wanted to work harder for this gentleman. This was this was a critical access hospital in Yeah. So this was a new CEO came in. Yeah, here was their performance. This number right here is operating margin right here. My pointer's on this kind of pale green color. And this hospital was just tanking. And you can see they had a negative of 10.6% negative operating margin. The new CEO came in, again, top three most abundant CEOs I've ever met. And if you take out COVID, take out 20 and 21 COVID, and run a line right through since this gentleman has come on board, here's their performance trended. So they went from a negative 10.6 loss to a 10% operating margin gain, and they're still going upwards. Just worked with the medical staff, growth focused. This gentleman leads with the concept that we are a provider-led organization. He's got probably six medical staff paid medical directors, created a whole budget process that they rolled out. So they created a measurement culture and extraordinary performance. Here's a critical access hospital in the Northwest in the state of Washington. Super abundant CEO came in. Here's the blue line here is their operating revenue. And you can see the growth as this gentleman allowed. Their operating expense was the red, and the difference was operating margin, which you'll see. They just went from a 10-bed critical access hospital. They just added 15 beds. So now they're a 25-bed critical access hospital and just doing really great stuff for the community. When I met with their board, they actually wanted their board chair. They had a commitment to become a blue zone within the next 10 years. So really kind of bold goals for their organization. Which one? I'm trying to think of what hospital this was. Oh, this is a good friend of mine. I'm actually going to see him on Thursday in New York. This was a critical access hospital that we visited pre-COVID, and they were just kind of just there, not really doing that much. New CEO came in, right around to join June of 2021. So you can see he joined somewhere between here and here. And look what happened to operating margin. Super abundance guy, relationship with the medical staff jumped. All the staff were engaged now, culture of rounding. And here's his operating revenue, the green line, and operating expense. They just announced plan to build a brand new critical access hospital, which will be the first new facility in the state of New York. Here's their liquidity, so days of operating expense in their cash. And since he came on, their days in cash has gone just through the roof. But not only is their financial performance, he also shared these around staff engagement. There was a 48% increase in staff or a 0.48 increase in staff engagement. Patient experience. This number right here is 100. The chart here shows 100, but you can only go to 100%. But you can see that the top box percentile rank from, I believe it's Press Ganey, they're in the top 90th percentile, and it's all happened since this gentleman came in. So a lot of words here, but I guess what I would say is that if we could all think about, how could we create this abundance-based culture, driving politics out of decision making, driving accountability in through measurement, and understanding the fundamental economics and ingrain that type of thinking, every one of our hospitals could be wildly successful. If you just take those 5 case studies that I showed you and apply them to any organization, they work. So that's the 3-part series that we're promised. Thoughts, comments, questions, ideas?
you talked a little bit about this, but I put a comment in the chat about what kind of behaviors do you observe an abundant-minded leader, CEO demonstrating?
I'm gonna think a couple of let me just think for a second. I'm trying to think about what this, the one guy that I showed you that came in the hospital losing money, and he'll talk about his physician-led, provider-led organization. Um, he engages everyone. I mean, you could walk into his office and he's open book. We'll sit down. He's out there in the community. He's let me give you an example of this gentleman. So remember when COVID struck and all the hospitals were laying off staff because volumes tanked from March, April, May, that first quarter of COVID of 2020,
Mm-hmm.
and hospitals were laying off staff. What this gentleman did is every nursing vacancy that they had, he filled with nurses that were unemployed because of the other hospitals laying off nurses. And he said, we'll find something for him. He trusted. I mean, the essence of abundance is, there's enough to provide. There's always going to be enough. And he trusted that there was going to be enough, and he filled his open positions. He does not have, at this point, he does not have a physician. He does not have any room for more primary care docs. He doesn't have his nurse. He has got no travelers and no room for it to add. He's got no open spots for his nurses. But these are it's kind of these, in the short term, you're making long range decisions that maybe in the short time people would frown upon, but you win the war. Those are just a couple examples
Thank you.
do you see it? Are there people in your organization you could see? I mean, frankly, I just ran into one this week in my travels to Alaska. And like I said, it's not the norm. It's not the norm because often it's the scarcity people get to the top of the organization because they take out the abundance people.
Mhm.
I got taken out. I got taken out in 1997. Didn't even see it coming,
Mhm.
but that's all right. It worked out. Hey, I appreciate you guys all listening in. It's been fun.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And
thanks
now
so
it's
much,
Thank
Eric.
you.
okay. All right. Well,
And
they're there. So if you ever want to share with anyone in your hospital, like this webinar is going to be available for your teams. So
yeah, we'll make some YouTubes of the 3 links and post it on our website. You all have the slides. We'll probably send that out again. But I really appreciate you all for coming on, and especially if you made it for all 3. So
extra
extra
reward
credit.
for that. And you made it all 3 and you didn't go to sleep.
Yeah.
All right, you guys all
Thanks
take
so
care.
much.
Thank
Okay.
you. And
Thanks,
have a good
everyone.
weekend.
Bye. Stop the recording here.